what I've seen as I've kind of become more mature and further removed from competing myself is really the beauty of what we do is not about, making someone run faster or jump higher or lift more weight. The beauty of what we do is helping someone achieve a goal that they didn't think otherwise possible.
Welcome to the Upside Strength Podcast, your number one fitness and performance resource in Switzerland. Today I'll be chatting with Mike Young, the owner of Athletic Lab and the performance director of the North Carolina Courage Soccer Club. Mike, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for the invite. Appreciate the opportunity.
No, it's great to have you on. So for those who don't know you yet, could you give us a little bit of your background?
So I have worked in sports science and coaching for going on a little over 20 years now. My educational background's in sports sciences, undergrad in exercise physiology, master's in coaching science, PhD in biomechanics with a minor in exercise physiology. I continue to do some research here and there, but my passion is really coaching. I started off as a track and field athlete, did that collegiately in the US at Division I level, later coached that, and coached at the highest level of U.S. collegiate track and field, which is pretty high. Internationally, that would be better than most countries in the world. Won a couple of team national championships with LSU. That's the university that I was at. Continued to coach post-collegiately and at several other universities, educational institutions after that. And then opened up Athletic Lab, which is a private sector sports performance training and research center. We work with everyone, professional athletes, fitness enthusiasts, youth developmental athletes, and via a connection, via some reach out through Athletic Lab, I started to work in the professional soccer world. So that then morphed into kind of a second career. So I have one hat where I spend part of my day as a elite level track and field coach, and then I switch hats and literally change clothes, and I'm working with some of the top soccer football players in the world. Our club is arguably the top team in the world, certainly no worse than top three teams. We have 11 international players. We've won everything there is to win in the US, and I've won in the rare chances we've had to play some of the top European clubs. We have held our own or beat them. Last year we lost to Nyon, but the year before we beat everyone in the International Champions Cup. So have found that I really like working in team sports as well as private sector or as well as track and field. It gives me an opportunity to get a little bit of both. Also, the opportunity to work and stay in private sector as well as work in a team setting where you're fully embedded with a club and something bigger than yourself is always nice. Gives you a little bit different perspective from seeing what the different settings are. One, I'm a sports scientist and strength and conditioning coach, and the other, I'm the full sport coach most of the time, as well as running a business. So it's very, very rewarding. I like what I do. I enjoy going to work every day. And I'm passionate about kind of passing on what has been shared with me through a handful of really top class mentors over the years.
So given your broad and extensive career and experience, what have been some of the defining moments in your career?
Well, the really kind of sexy ones, the ones that are probably most notable on paper, would be winning some national championships, 16 national championships in the sport of track and field while I was at LSU. That was almost unprecedented. We became one of the most successful teams in the history of the NCAA, regardless of sport. So we won 16 national championships in 4 years. And then accomplished something similar on the women's soccer side with this football club I'm with right now. We had a handful of championships, but most recently we've had 3 consecutive years where we were at the very, very top, had a handful of players go and win World Cups. We won everything there was to win in the United States. I think in in 3 seasons, we've only lost something like four games. So very, very top level in terms of just performance. But I've had a handful of things that have just been very rewarding. Otherwise, working in different settings, sometimes the things that bring the most acclaim and are most notable on paper are not necessarily the biggest turning points in one's career. And I've had a handful of things that I've been in the right place at the right time, and a perfect storm of sorts where I was connected with the right people or given the right opportunities, things that I'm sure everyone can probably speak to and reflect on in their life, that they have had similar situations where I look at the success that I have had, and a lot of it comes from people I met along the way or had the opportunity to mentor under, or chances that I took. And those are really the things that I think are most important, that I reflect back on most fondly.
Who have been some of your biggest influences?
There's a couple really big ones. I'd say first and foremost would be a coach named Boo Schexnayder. I'm not sure if he's too familiar outside of the world of track and field athletics, but he's world renowned in the jumping events and coaching education in the U.S. and elsewhere. And he was very successful. I worked under Boo for 4 years every day. I was his apprentice coach, and learned an incredible amount from him. Similarly, Dan Paff, who I've never actually worked for or even really much alongside, has always helped me both in my career as well as anytime I needed to gain further insight. He's a guy that has been there and done it on the highest level in multiple different events and even a couple different sports. And my training philosophy is very much based around what Dan and Boo do. I've also had the pleasure of working under a guy named Ethan Reeve, who I was one of his assistants, and he has now gone on to 2 other universities, but he has become the president of the United States Collegiate Strength Coaches Association, which is one of the biggest strength coaching associations in the world. I believe it's larger than the ASCA and larger than the UKSCA, probably second only to the NSCA in terms of number of strength coaches. And these are people who are actual strength coaches, not necessarily physical therapists or athletic trainers or corrective exercise specialists, but people who are actually in the weight room being strength coaches. So he was a tremendous influence on me, both programmatically, philosophically, but also in terms of as a person, as a coach, how to relate to other people, how to be a leader, that kind of thing. So really, really lucky. Only in a couple of those instances can I say that I earned the right to meet these people. There, a lot of times it was just by chance, and I didn't necessarily know the true power or clout of these individuals, and they were tremendous in terms of taking me under their wing and assisting me, and even after I worked for them, helping me to have opportunities and so forth.
So maybe, backpedaling just a little bit, you mentioned you were a track athlete. Did you always know you wanted to be a coach, or did that come somewhere along the way?
I knew so I'll start early and then kind of answer that question. When I was about 11 or 12, I really got into sports sciences, and I remember asking for Christmas sports science journals, books, and a magazine called Track Coach. So this was the USA Track and Field Technical Journal. This was as young as about 12 years old, and this continued throughout time I was about 18 years old, still competing. And really, what I thought I was doing at the time was helping myself improve as an athlete. And then as a coach, or then as a young athlete, I kind of continued to dive into everything that I could read and find, and any coaches that would help me out, and really be a student of exercise science. And so I went into university, thinking that I wanted to be a medical doctor. And really the reason for that wasn't so much that I wanted to be a medical doctor, but I knew that I wanted to reach the pinnacle of my career. That's kind of my personality type. I like to see how far I can take things. And in the U.S., a medical doctor is kind of one of the more highly esteemed, most financially rewarded fields. So I went into the what is called pre-med track in university and did that for 3 years. And after the third year, I realized this wasn't what I was passionate about. And I took that education and I transferred it over to sports science. So I became an exercise physiologist to finish my degree. Did that for 2 more years. And then I immediately began coaching as a assistant college coach, and then have coached ever since. I had my first coaching opportunity when I was about 17 or 18 years old with a club. But even at that time, I wasn't quite sure that's what I wanted to do. In retrospect, I look back and I see this is what I've always been passionate about from the time I was 12 years old, is the sports sciences and human performance. And as my career has evolved, I'm less interested about a particular sport or a particular athlete. And what I've seen as I've kind of become more mature and further removed from competing myself is really the beauty of what we do is not about making someone run faster or jump higher or lift more weight. The beauty of what we do is helping someone achieve a goal that they didn't think otherwise possible. So whether that is working with a general fitness client, which I don't do that too much anymore, but my facility works with a lot of general fitness clients. I find that kind of thing very rewarding, whether it's a general fitness client or a elite athlete looking to make the Olympic Games. If you can help someone achieve a goal that appears to be unachievable or impossible or bigger than themselves, I think that's incredibly rewarding. We work in a field where sometimes the best people and the hardest work is not rewarded financially, but we have an opportunity to literally change people's lives. We can make their life better, whether that is being able to live a longer, more productive life, or we can help them make an Olympic team or make a World Cup or whatever it is. I think it's very rewarding to be able to do this and do it pursue what you're passionate about while earning a living. I think is something that I'm very grateful for.
I really like that answer. We often talk in the strength and conditioning field about, always questioning your own beliefs and never standing still in what you think. So what might be some of the things that you changed your mind about throughout the years as you've kind of evolved and grown as a coach?
There's quite a few things. I'll back up and say, philosophically, I'm very much open to failure or being wrong. In fact, we tell our mentor coaches that we don't really care how much they know when they come in. We just want them to be open-minded, and we want them to be both simultaneously open-minded, but also incredibly critical-minded. So we want them to come to any training philosophy or management or cueing system or program design or exercise selection with an open mind. We don't want them to pursue it with a bias, meaning they shouldn't say, this is what I always did, or this successful coach did it, or this athlete did it, or even this one research study did it. We want them to be open-minded about changing their viewpoints at all points in time. So my system is ever evolving. It is effectively, and I would encourage all coaches to follow suit on this, it is effectively the scientific method in a day-to-day process. Meaning I have a hypothesis that a certain training intervention will work. I impose that training intervention, that stimulus. I will test to see if it did what I thought it was going to do. And if it did not, then I will revise my hypothesis, put forth a new intervention, and test again. And so that my training is always evolving. There are a handful of things which I would say I was wrong about initially. If I were to look at the training that I was imposing on myself, thinking that I knew better when I was 18 years old, it was very, very volume based. despite being a speed power athlete. He was very much aerobic based. I think I've gotten very much away from that, having worked with Boo and Dan and so forth. But I've started to understand how the neuromuscular system works, and that's probably been the biggest change from one polarization to the other. But then even over the past couple years, my mindset on strength training has changed a little bit. I'm very much what we might call in the U.S. a meat and potatoes guy, meaning I like to squat, I like to lunge, I like to press, I like to pull. And I've gotten athletes who become very strong. They can squat 2.5 to 3 times body weight. They can clean 2 times body weight in the sports of track and field, and even some very strong guys in other sports as well. And what I've done though over the past couple of years, and this is increasingly occurring, is I have started to back off a little bit on your very traditional strength training once I get athletes to a very high level of strength. So it's not to say we take any of that out at any point in time, but I've started to realize that if someone has a 2.5 times body weight squat, which is pretty dang strong, it's okay if I don't squat them all the time, or it's okay if I don't try to make them stronger. We may have very limited returns on our investment if I just continue to pursue traditional mass-based strength. So I've started to find ways that we can better bridge the gap between athletic performance and the weight room once we get athletes relatively strong. And that bar is quite high. I don't really even start to look at that at all until we get athletes to the 2.2 times body weight squat type level, 1.6, 1.7 times body weight clean level. So we're talking about very strong athletes, but I used to pursue strength a little bit more than I do now. And now I'm willing to back off a little bit. And just as I was describing with the scientific method, I'm very incremental. So I won't change from black to white. What I'll do is I will pull away a little bit and see what the impact is. So this has been a progression over the past probably 5 years or so, where I've recognized that I can get athletes really, really strong. And it's quite easy to get guys to these metrics in terms of your traditional barbell strength. And then what can I do to take them to the next level? Because taking someone from a 2.5 times body weight squat to a 3 times body weight squat may not improve their performance in a sprint or a jump. In fact, it could very well have no effect, or maybe even negatively impact them in some cases. So what can I do to make sure that our time is better spent than pursuing gains that have no impact on performance? So I've really become a little bit more mindful on how do I increase this transfer effect of training to the actual sport, whether that is team sports or individual sports or weight room or the speed work that we do. Ultimately, it's easy to be very numbers focused and focused on things like the weight room numbers, or even say a 30-meter sprint test or a vertical jump test. But ultimately what matters is how well they perform in their sport. And if I can marry those two things and show that have a greater transfer of my improvement on the numbers and their improvement in their sport, then I think, it goes back to allowing people to achieve the things that they didn't think were possible. So, 2 examples there. One is like young, very, very young me versus older me, realizing that, training for a speed power athlete looks nothing like a aerobic athlete. And then more recently, even then, the evolution of seeing what the relevance of strength is for speed and power. And it's, at least in the US, where we have the university settings and high school settings where these athletes will go into the weight room and just, lift absurd amounts of weight. You see very strong kids in fantastic weight rooms in the US. And you have what I would call a meathead approach oftentimes, where you're just see how much you can deadlift, see how much you can squat, see how much you can bench press. And that can be very effective for youth athletes. But I think once you get to a certain level of strength, that there's a very fast diminishing returns there. So I've wisened up a little bit and started to realize my time is better spent elsewhere, especially with these more advanced athletes.
What led you to that realization that, like you said, when you get to a pretty high level of strength, then it's maybe time to, spend your time a little more wisely with things that are going to make the needle actually move forward in the sport itself?
So a lot of that really just comes down to being self-critical. So I'm always auditing my programs. With my track and field athletes, they're somewhat my test lab, my scientific lab. We test them every 4 weeks. Sometimes there's intermediary tests, jump, like a RSI jump test, or a vertical jump test, or maybe a rep max or velocity-based metric somewhere mid-cycle. So I'm constantly collecting data, and based off of this data, I can start to cross-reference and see what's happening. And really what I was seeing is I used to lift a lot. Even with my more advanced athletes, I'd lift a lot in the 90 to 95+% range in the training cycles. And we wouldn't max out per se, but we would lift in this range that was very close to maximums. And now I do it very rarely. I've kind of seen that there's a pretty substantial difference from a physiological standpoint of producing maximal force and doing so very quickly. And the adaptations that you see from training for those true max force without regard to velocity, it may not have the results that you want. So more and more I'm scaling back a little bit. So once I, for example, get athletes to this higher level, 2.25 to 2.5 times squat, I'm really not working in those upper echelons of percentages anymore. I'm backing off to the 85% level or 80 to 85% level, and we're just moving it faster. So these guys are already strong enough, and now it's just, can we move these big loads faster and faster? So for example, in the past, I might do 3 or 4 sets of 2 to 3 reps of squat at 95%. So this is absolutely killer workout. Might be something that shows up in a weightlifting training hall video from some Bulgarian weightlifting team. And we would get guys very strong like that. I did have some success, had guys win national championships and represent the US and using those methods. But then, despite really pushing the boundaries of that, I wasn't seeing much return on investment. So then we started to pull back a little bit. And as I pulled back, I haven't seen any drop off really. These guys clearly now are able to move big loads pretty darn fast. And I think just putting it into the context of what's relevant for sport, I think regardless of whether you're a track and field or a team sport athlete, power is what matters. So if you can move weight fast, that's more important than just moving more weight. I want to kind of really emphasize here that I would never move to that shift before someone is reasonably strong. I think that would be an error. I think there's plenty of research literature to show that you need to be pretty strong to maximize power, and that maximum strength is the underpinnings of maximum power. And that for novice and adolescent athletes, that strength will improve power more than power training will improve power if you're weak. So I pretty much don't have, thankfully, any weak athletes right now. Everybody's quite strong. So we're able to really play around with the training a little bit more and see what we can do. And, this year in particular, I've changed up my progressions again, and we'll be shifting even more so to a little higher velocity, a little lower load, and really shifting things also to an even greater emphasis on eccentric capacities. A couple of years back, I wasn't specifically training that in any progressive way. So I might include pause squats, I might include slow eccentrics, but now I have a very specific continuum that I've been working on for several years now, and I think we're starting to see some really tremendous benefits out of it. Our guys are we're 4 cycles, about 14 weeks into this year's training for my track and field group, and our results this year have been just tremendous. And I've only made just a couple little tweaks, and this is one of the cases where the results of the testing in this scientific method exceeded the hypothesis. The results so far have been better than what I might have predicted, which is always nice to have because usually it's not as good as that.
Is that eccentric focus also kind of reserved to your stronger and more advanced athletes, or might that be something that you can integrate a little bit more in the strength focus as you develop someone?
Yeah, that's a good question. So basically, I look at it like this. On one side of the continuum, you have things like submaximal isometrics and submaximal eccentrics. And then on the other side of the continuum, you have maximal isometrics and fast overloaded eccentrics. Some of which is hit by things like plyometrics and maybe even sprinting in a more advanced athlete. Mm-hmm. But if you have an athlete who's quite weak, I think that work on concentric strength, get it up to at least, reasonable level, 1 times body weight squat, 1.5 times body weight squat. There's no excuse that anyone should not be at that level. Whether we're talking about squatting or not doesn't matter, but that level of strength, whether that's associated with deadlifting or squatting or whatever, there's no excuse that someone shouldn't have that level of strength. That's conclusively shown to improve performance. Once they get there, I think it's okay to start incorporating more eccentric and isometric work. With our isometric work, I do start with submaximal, where using a load that someone could overcome if they wanted to. And with our eccentric work, we start submaximal as well. So using a load that they volitionally control the descent. So they could overcome the load if they wanted to, but they control the speed of the descent. And then gradually increasing the load to the point where we are maybe getting into close to maximal level eccentric work. I think there's ways to, and then isometric work would progress to maximal isometrics where you're pushing against an immovable object. Now, once we've gotten to that end point, which I think for me at least has been reserved just for the athletes that I train year round, usually in an individual sport setting, like bobsleigh or track and field, then I'm getting into some of the really kind of fancy stuff, the stuff that looks great on Instagram, but it's taking me 30, 40 weeks to get there, and a very highly trained, developed athlete. And I don't play around with any of that with my team sport athletes. With my team sport athletes, we Olympic lift, we squat. 80% of the weight room work looks pretty similar, but we're not getting to the really, really advanced overloaded eccentrics. Our plyometrics are much more simple. We'll certainly do some eccentric work, but it's usually submaximal, whether that's a slow eccentric squat or maybe plyometrics, or certainly we include Nordic hamstring curls. The research on that is quite conclusive. So, we're not doing any of the really advanced stuff that I think you have to be quite cautious on using. And really the less developed athlete doesn't need that type of work to progress. The way I kind of think of it is you should use the lowest training stimulus, the lowest training stimulus that will be effective for a given athlete. Because once you set the bar really high, you can't go back. Say for example, with plyometrics, people like to look at some of the things that Russians were doing with plyometrics back in the 70s and early 80s. And you'll find athletes jumping off of a 2-meter high box onto one leg and then rebounding over a hurdle, things like this. And people think that that's necessary. And really, these are guys that have 2.5 times body weight squats. They're using all kinds of performance enhancing drugs. They trained for 10 years of their life to get to that point. And they have to do that. Their sport involves some level of that type of explosiveness. That's completely unnecessary for someone that needs to run around for 90 minutes and, makes 5-meter sprints. And everything that they do is in the context of a match rather than a single event like triple jump or long jump. So, all of my athletes will focus on the basics. The more advanced ones, the ones that have a greater need for physical development, I really do try to push the upper boundaries of that force velocity curve and eccentric loading. But if your sport doesn't need it, or it's a lesser component to your sport, then I'm very careful not to go there, because I think it takes a while to get to that point safely. You could take your average athlete and have them fall off of a 2-meter high box, but they're only going to be able to do that a couple times before they break their legs or rupture their ACL or something like that. So it takes a really long time to get to that advanced sexy stuff. And I'm very cautious to do it. But if the progression is correct, I think the rewards for that type of training can be quite high.
Yeah, so maybe shifting the conversation towards the team sport athletes and maybe specifically the soccer teams that you work with in that domain of strength development, because from what I understand, and I guess it depends where you are, it's definitely not the case with your guys and gals, but I mean, in many soccer clubs and teams, strength work is definitely not a staple and definitely not something that everybody claims as being one of the pillars of the physical development of their plays. But for you, how strong is strong enough in the realm of soccer?
So, I oversee our entire club. We have a men's and women's side. But oddly, I work almost exclusively with the women right now. One of my assistants work with the men. I work with the women. Our women is the higher level club. They're first division. Our men is second division. And our women have a higher budget, and they can afford to have me out all the time and that kind of thing. So I'm with the women all the time. So my numbers I'll give you my numbers for women, or my experience with our women. We strength train at least once a week all year long. So in the weight room, not a body weight circuit on the pitch or anything like that. We're in the weight room at least once a week all year long. Much of the year we're in the weight room 2 times a week. And goalkeepers are oftentimes in the weight room 3 times a week. Now, this is, when I say this is non-negotiable, I mean, we're doing that for, the entire 42 plus weeks of the year. There's not weeks where we're saying, oh, there was a match, the athletes are tired, we're not going to go in the weight room. No, we're going in the weight room. We're going to lift reasonably heavy once a week at least, and we're going to sprint at least once a week. Those are non-negotiables, non-starters for us. I guarantee you we do that. We do it every single week. And those are the absolute minimums for us. What does the weight training look like? We're on a 3 to 4 week cycle, depending on the match schedule. And the thing that will trigger us to switch early or late would be whether there's a break in the schedule. So our match density is similar to what you might see in Europe, in that it's typically a match on Saturday, occasionally a match on Wednesday, occasionally you might have a Sunday. Very, very rarely you have a Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday scenario. So 3 games in a 6-day period. That might happen once a year for us, and that would be the only time where we did not do a strength training session, because of course you're traveling. In the US, you have coast to coast is 5 to 6 hours of travel at the very minimum. And 3 games in 6 days is just a lot. So we might not strength train in those scenarios, at least not for our starting 11. But when we do get a break in the schedule, that's where I might switch the routine up a little bit. But for a 3 to 4 week span, the routine is going to be fairly similar with iterative changes, meaning we're just going to have a very small evolution. We might go from 3 reps to 2 reps, or change our sets and rep scheme, or add load, or a slight variation on an exercise. Because one thing I found with team sports is that they don't like to be sore when they're in season. Track and field athletes are fine with this. They don't really care. I work with weightlifters. They don't care about being sore, but team sport athletes don't like to be sore, especially in soccer, football. So I generally won't let them get too sore in season. They'll get a little sore, but usually what triggers the soreness is a switch up of the program. So if we change the program, they'll get sore just from the sheer novelty of the training. So my exercise selection stays pretty fixed for about 3 to 4 weeks. And then when we switch it up, we have the opportunity to change it, either because I need to change it at 4 or 5 weeks, or because there's a break in the schedule. I will match that up with a period where it has less impact on the game, the upcoming game. Now, the actual programming itself is pretty basic. So we do Olympic lifts or derivatives of them. Sometimes we might have athletes clean pull, or a hex bar deadlift or hex bar deadlift jump. Mm-hmm. And we'll almost always start with something explosive, lower extremity exercise. And then we'll go to a lower body strength movement. A lot of times this is just a basic squat or lunge. We'll add little variations to it, maybe a pause, maybe doing it for speed, that kind of thing. There'll be changes in the sets and reps over the course of the season. Mm. And then we'll pair that typically with an upper body pull and or press. And then we finish with some posterior chain and core work. So typically a mix of either rotation or anti-rotation work for the core, and some eccentrically focused hamstring work, occasionally Nordics, but a lot of times we'll use RDLs and various variations of those. So we're typically in the gym for about 45 to 50 minutes. It's a very structured program. It might look like what I might do for a lot of other sports. There's no soccer specific, what I would say, nonsense in there. We're not standing on a Bosu ball and kicking a soccer ball or anything like that. We're not heading a weighted ball or anything like that. It's just, you might not know that they were soccer players if you saw the session. Mm. You might say, oh, this is a professional women's basketball team, or maybe even field hockey or something to that effect. And that, I think, that's by design. For my athletes, I would say that 70 to 80% of the training, the building blocks in the weight room is going to look the same regardless of the sport. And then the rest is going to be sport specific. So we'll do that at least once a week for 4 weeks, and then switch it up. The girls are quite strong. We've got 30 players, and I would say about 15 of them could do maybe 8 to 20 non-kipping pull-ups on their own. They could knock out, I don't know, maybe 20. Everyone could knock out 20 perfect push-ups. Everyone could squat 1.25 to 1.75 times body weight. And these are like team averages. I have some outliers there, right, but they can all clean their body weight. I've got a couple girls that can clean about 1.5 times body weight. A couple girls that can squat 1.9 times body weight. So some pretty tremendously strong and athletic girls. I think we've got, 3 girls who have vertical jumps at points above 0.75 of a meter. One who is like pushing 0.9 meters on a vertical jump, standing vertical jump. So we're actually known as a team for our athleticism, but we have great speed numbers, great endurance numbers. Our 30-15 numbers are are off the charts as well. So I'm really lucky to have a coach who has fully bought into what we do, and his style of play is very physically demanding. So we train incredibly hard. In fact, our numbers for a women's team exceed anything I've ever seen outside of the English Premier League academy level, where you have boys that are just, 16 to 18 and just training for the sake of training. They're not really playing any matches of anything meaningful. But we're regularly at 32 to 37K in a week of total meterage. And, of the 30 girls, let's see, 15 or more can run over 31 kilometers per hour. So these are numbers that you typically would see in a men's team. And, these women are just phenomenal athletes, and they're really hard, what I would call hard-nosed, hard-working, fully bought into the training process. They realize you can't play for our particular team unless you're very fit. So it's a really good match in terms of, I've got a coach that lets me do whatever I want to do. He fully trusts me. He plays a style that is dependent on me doing my job very well. And we have had a lot of success with it. And I think to a lesser degree, that's true with the U.S. international soccer. You see U.S. international soccer is probably more physically developed than a lot of their European counterparts. We're bigger, faster, stronger a lot of times than, say, most other clubs or most other countries. But our club in particular, in our league, is we're known for our athleticism and fitness. So you pretty much couldn't get away with what we do without training like we train. Our games are easy for us because of how hard we train during the week.
Is that culture of physical preparation, was that there when you arrived as a performance director, or is that something that you had to bring in?
So with this coach that I just kind of applauded and praised is an interesting one, because he's the first coach I've ever worked for who hasn't, in a team sport setting, that hasn't explicitly brought me in. So all the other team coaches that I've worked for sought me out and brought me in unsolicited. So I immediately had buy-in with all of these other coaches. Mm-hmm. This coach, he was brought in and he was told that he needed to work with me. So I already existed at the club. I was primarily working with the men at the time. Mm-hmm. And when the team expanded and brought in a women's side, I began to work with the women. So initially he was quite skeptical of what we were doing for about the first year. He liked what he liked, and I did things a little bit differently. But it took about 9 months, a little under a season, for us to really mesh well together, and for him to kind of let me do whatever I need to do. It's really been the most freedom that I think I've had. There's a tremendous mutual respect. And really, at the end of the day, this is what I would hope for a lot of other strength coaches and their relationship with the head coach or the sport coach, is that really, if we do our job, we're going to make the sport coach look better. I think we know our field better than they do. We wouldn't try to step into their field, technical, tactical, whatever the sport is, and try to do their job for them. But a lot of times you see that actually happens in our field, where the sport coach vetoes or tries to control the strength and conditioning coach or the fitness coach or the sports scientist, even though that's not their area of expertise, which is unfortunate. But I think that if you can get into a working relationship where the coach trusts you and gives you the ability to do what you want to do and what you feel is necessary. Of course, if you failed and you had athletes get injured, then they should have the right to pull back and everything. But if you know what you're doing and you do it well, then that's the ideal scenario. So initially, I think there was a trust building phase. I had not worked with anyone prior to that point who basically didn't give me full authority. And it took about 9 months or so with this particular coach for him to let me do what I want. But now it's probably the best team sport coach relationship that I've had. We've been very successful. And as I said, it's a very big part of our team. When I was with the men's side, we had a lot of success. We won a couple league championships, 2 league championships in a 2-year stretch. And that actually led me to go to a first division club. Other clubs noticed this, that we were also very physically dominant. And I think what I have found, that guy brought me in, but he didn't know anything about me. I think he brought me in by convenience. He just realized that I was in town and he could probably get me for cheap at the time. So I worked with him, and they had a lot of success. And to be perfectly honest, I knew basically nothing about the sport of soccer football at the time. I probably had to look up how many players were on the field or something. I don't know. I was a total idiot in terms of soccer. I didn't play it or anything like that. I didn't watch it. And now I've become a student of the sport as much as I can, and certainly as much as is necessary to do my job well. And I just trained the crap out of these guys, this men's team, from very early on. And we got incredibly fit and strong, pretty much using the methods that you might use in track and field. We used interval-based running, and we did a lot of hard physical training, never incorporated the ball. We lifted heavy. We did some plyometrics, and this team went from, nearly the bottom of the league to winning 2 league championships overnight. And I don't in any way proclaim that I'm solely responsible for that, but we were known again for our physicality, and we dominated teams with our speed and our fitness. And that immediately got buy-in. And if you can show that that's the effect that you can have, then I think success breeds buy-in. Coming in with a reputation will only get you so far if that reputation isn't followed with results. I've come in with a reputation before and really admittedly have that advantage sometimes, but if I were ever to come in and not produce results, I would fully expect to be fired or demoted or something to that effect. And that's what should happen. If you're good and you produce results, then you should be given the opportunity to continue to do so. And if you, don't produce results, this is a results-based field, and you should be critical of yourself and recognize why that might have been the case.
What would you recommend to strength and conditioning coaches that maybe aren't lucky enough to be paired up with a sports coach that allows them to at least, kind of show what they can do so that they can get results, so that potentially they can get more buy-in? What happens when you're in a situation where you're kind of, shut down by the sports coach, where they don't want players to even maybe sprint sometimes? They don't want them to lift heavy because that's not what you need on the field. So how would you approach it from that perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have not worked in too many scenarios like that, except for this current one, but I do run a business, and I have a daughter, and I have a wife, and I have worked on other sports teams. So I think a lot of it just simply comes down to relationships. And if you want to win every relationship, if you want to win every debate, so to speak, any point of debate or point of contention, and you think that the best way to do that is to tell the other person they're wrong, you're very misguided. I think it's really important that you sit back, sometimes swallow your ego, and educate first. So if, as a sports scientist, you educate and say, very subtly point out why something might be needed, what the best way to achieve that end might be. And then I found in team sports settings that it can be very useful to make it so that the sport coach believes that the idea is his or hers. So don't try to take credit for the idea itself. Let them have credit, believe that they made that choice. Ultimately, I think that is their choice to make. They're the executor of the team. So they make the executive decisions about whether we go in the weight room more often or not at all, or whether we sprint or we don't sprint. And so you educate them, and you point things out like, hey, if we sprint minimum once a week at this type of volume with this type of intensity, not only can I get guys faster, but the research shows pretty well that I'll reduce the likelihood for injury. And you can just kind of subtly make these cases, drop little tidbits, in your correspondence with the coach and your day-to-day passings with them, to where they start to understand why you have these strongly held beliefs. Because ultimately, I think if someone is good in their job at what we do, we don't believe what we believe for no reason. We have a reason for what we believe. So if that's strength training, well, any dummy in our field knows that you can improve performance and you can reduce the likelihood for injury if you strength train. It's irrefutable. If anyone wants to say otherwise, they are willfully ignorant, right? What you do is a little bit of a matter for debate, but the fact that strength training improves performance and reduces your likelihood for injury it's not debatable. It's a sealed deal. So there are still certainly coaches that don't believe this is to be the case, or certainly coaches who believe that you can just strength train in the off season and not strength train all year long, or you can strength train once a month and reap rewards. And it doesn't work like that. So all it comes down to is educate them on why would we strength train in the first place? What are the benefits? Then what are the details? How often? What kind of strength training? Is soreness okay? Is it not okay? These types of things, so that, if I get athletes a little bit sore on Tuesday, from the Tuesday strength training session, and they're reporting that they're sore on Wednesday, and telling the coach that they're sore, does the coach and the athlete know that that's okay? The match isn't for 4 more days, that it's okay to be a little sore, and that training hard is not a bad thing. It's an important thing, and it's necessary for long-term sustainable success. So I think a lot of it will come down to educate why you believe what you believe, and don't try to take credit for those beliefs, because ultimately the sport coach probably believes you want the same thing. You both want team success. You both want higher performance, lower injuries, but maybe the team coach thinks that you'll get fewer injuries because if you sprint less in training, or if you don't strength train. And clearly he's just misinformed, because those two things are not supported by any of the research or anecdotal evidence. So if you can somehow show them without doing what we might call a told you so, kind of saying this is my idea, or trying to take credit for anything, or, say I was right, you were wrong, that I found it to be much more successful.
So you spoke about sprinting a few times and the importance of it. Can you expand a little bit on the role of speed training in soccer preparation for you?
Yeah, so we we strength train a minimum of once a week, and we do a dedicated speed session a minimum of once a week. Those might go up to 2 times a week, depending on the match density. Those 2 things are non-negotiable for us. We might actually take out our conditioning session. So typically we would have a dedicated conditioning session once a week, in addition to the field work. But the conditioning session might be removed some weeks, but the strength session and the speed session never get removed. We never go below 1, other than, say, the super rare scenario where you had 3 matches in 6 days. So a couple pointers on sprinting. You have to bring intensity. If you don't sprint intensely at 95+%, I don't think it's actually considered sprinting. It's just running fast. And there's quite a bit of research to suggest that the sub-maximal running is not as effective, neither as effective at making you faster, nor as preventing injuries as maximal sprinting. So while sprinting itself, exposure to sprinting raises your likelihood for injury. You can combat that by regular and frequent exposures to sprinting.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that athletes are going to sprint in a game. So to protect them from that high likelihood for injury from sprinting, we need to actually sprint in training. So sprinting is a maximal effort sprint. It's 95+%. We have to do it in volumes that are appropriate. So because the intensity of sprinting is so high, you can't do it in high volumes. So typically my speed session for football players is around 200 to 250 meters of sprinting.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a lot of changing direction or starts and stops, then I will quantify in terms of the time spent rather than the distance. We would have to allow adequate rest. So, in between reps. So the reps will typically be anywhere between 15 to 40 meters. I have a progression for that. We typically start on the shorter side, and as athletes get more fit and faster, we'll progress to longer reps. But we rarely, if ever, run repetitions in our speed sessions over 40 meters or about 5.5, 6 seconds of running. And I'll allow sufficient rest and recovery. So that might mean as much as 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes of recovery for a team sport athlete for something like a 30-meter, 40-meter sprint. So this is a pretty long rest period for a team sport athlete. With my track and field athletes, we would rest twice that much. But if you rested less than that, those recommended numbers, you're not going to really be training speed. You'll turn it into something that it is not true speed development. So get the frequency right at least once a week, get the intensity right, 95+%, get the total volume right, somewhere between 150 to 250 meters or so. There's some research from Tim Gabbett and colleagues on that. And then get the density right, which is like how much you can pack in the session. Then the rest is details. How do we incorporate reaction and decision making? How do we incorporate changing direction? How do we incorporate change of pace? Do we incorporate curvilinear running where it's not all straight line? Do we ever incorporate the ball? So these are things that I will sparingly do, but I make sure that they never take away from the fact that when I want to sprint, we're actually sprinting. So it's, I don't spend 10 touches on the ball, or I don't sprint on the ball very often because it's so clearly submaximal in terms of the physiological stimulus and subsequent adaptation response. It's a skill, and they get plenty of that when they play. What they don't get a lot when they play is a maximal effort sprint with long rest and appropriate density. So there's not a lot of secrets on that stuff, but still you don't see a lot of people do it well. Usually what I look for is get our dedicated speed session in during the week. Typically that is match day -2 for us, which is surprising for a lot of people. We sprint max out 2 days out. And then in the game, of course, you'll get some athletes will trigger high speed values. So it's very rare that athletes run as fast in a game as they do in these dedicated speed sessions, but they'll usually get a little bit of sprint exposure in a game. So it turns it into kind of 2 exposures to sprinting in the course of a week, with about, in my setup, usually about 2/3 of their total volume coming from the dedicated speed session and 1/3 to a half from the actual game. I found that kind of frequency, density, volume, intensity, that keeps us really fast, and we don't really have any hamstring injuries as a result of it.
No, like you said, one of the big benefits of speed training being that we do get exposed to those max velocities, and so when they do happen, if they do happen in the game, then we're kind of ready for them, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So last big question for you, Mike, today. What are you currently fascinated about in the field of sports performance?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm kind of looking into a couple things, trying to understand some of the adaptations to eccentric training. I think I have progressions that I've built around eccentric training and isometric training and what's happening here. But so I'm looking at the exact physiological response to those forms of training. I'm continuing to try to look at what happens in game settings and team sport setting. So what is the best form of training that will prepare the athlete for the games? Because what's actually interesting is a lot of times in our domain, fully mimicking what the game looks like is not the best way to prepare the athlete for the game. So, playing the game is not going to make athletes faster. It's going to get them fit, but probably not fit enough for the game to be easy. So how do you develop things like repeat sprintability and the aerobic capacity to last well beyond 90 minutes and the ability to sprint really fast? All of these conflicting adaptations, how do we develop them all? And then I guess last thing that I've kind of ties into that first point is that on eccentric training is, when I was touching on it before, I was more so looking at the neuromuscular response and what's actually happening at the cellular level. But I think more relevant than that perhaps is how do we increase the transfer of training to the sport itself? So what can we do to improve what we're doing in the weight room, what we're doing on the speed work into the actual sport? So whether that's, your speed work incorporates some reaction, change of direction, cognitive processing, that kind of thing, chaotic environments, or whether that's the weight room where we're doing some strength training where, there's, I think right now I'm playing around with a floating heel squats. So, this is kind of contrarian to what you might see some places, but we're going to do some flywheel, some squats with a K-box. This cycle where the heel is actually elevated. So the ankle is just in a constant state of isometric contraction, which is really what happens when you run well. You store the gastroc is isometrically contracted. Most of the lengthening comes through the Achilles tendon. That could only happen if the gastroc stays at a fixed isometric length, and then we release that elastic energy and produce propulsive force. So just tweaking things here and there, seeing where I can get better transfers of training to the actual sport is kind of something that I've really kind of looked to do. And I guess that even if we loop back and talk about our first question about getting athletes strong, that's ultimately what that is about too, is early on when you're young, getting athletes really strong will have a tremendous transfer of training effect to sport. But as an athlete becomes more developed and stronger, then there's a huge diminishing returns there, and the return on investment to get someone stronger and stronger once they're already very strong becomes less and less. So how do we continue progression? What do we move towards when we've reached that diminishing returns point?
Mike, it's been a great pleasure talking to you today and learning more about what you do with your different endeavors and following that successful and long career of yours already. Where can people find out more about you if they want to follow you on social and know a bit more about what you do?
So I've been quite active lately on Instagram. My handle is Mike Young, PhD. I post quite a bit on Twitter, some kind of evergreen articles that I have written, as well as trusted sources there. It's just at Mike Young. And then my training center is Athletic Lab, and we hold all the various social for that, whether it be YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. And if anyone's ever stateside and wants to take a visit, we appreciate international visitors. You're always welcome to stop in and see what we're doing.
Well, that's great, Mike. Thanks so much for your time today and have a great day.
Thank you. You too.